This is Truth Be Told.
That not only are there reptilians here,
new evidence of UFO fleets.
We were close to nuclear war.
To help you transform so that you can live your highest truth.
We're not being told just because we're not ready for it.
Radio stations of frequency, vibrational.
I was a homicide detective with LAPD.
UFOs increase. Visitations. (1492). They say Columbus sailed the ocean blue, but in 1692, a small village known as Salem, Massachusetts, was suddenly attacked by the spectrums of flying witches and all manners of evil. Yes, today we're going to be talking about the history and hauntings of Salem, the witch trials and beyond. The new book by Rebecca F. Pittman, and we're excited to have her back to talk about her latest book. We're going to talk about a group of young girls began crying out against their neighbors and family members. By the time it was over, 19 people were hanged, 1 man was crushed to death, and 5 succumbed to the ordeal of imprisonment. A lot to talk about. So if you're ready for the Halloween season, let's start it off right. I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. So please welcome back to Truth Be Told Studios, author Rebecca Pittman. Hello, Rebecca.
Hello, Tony. How are you?
I am so great, and this, as you can see, I got my orange on for the pumpkin season, and excited to have you back with us and to talk about your book.
I have my fire going for pumpkin season.
There you go. And where do you live again?
Colorado.
Oh,
and,
so probably
it's just starting to get a little more nippy than usual.
Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure the fire fits right into what Colorado is. It? I'm sure, is it snowing yet?
Oh no, we won't see that for a while. Although there's a lot of times it snows on Halloween, and those great little costumes get covered up with coats. But right now we're going to be in the 70s again this weekend.
Oh,
it
wow.
just pops around.
Well, for the people that are joining us in the chat, we've had Rebecca on before. Rebecca's, a very talented author. You can go to her website, RebeccaPittmanBooks.com, see all the books that she writes, true crime and paranormal. And today, this is the first Friday of October, which, again, we're diving into the Halloween season. And we're going to talk about the history of Salem and a lot of the hauntings that go on. And I'm sure there's a lot of spirits that are still unrested from the way they left this earth. And so, first of all, how did you get started on the book, and what really caught your eye on writing about the subject?
I think it's the same for a lot of people. I think that this is one of those amazing moments in history that you can't look away from. I mean, it was the perfect storm of events to cause it in the first place. And I'm often asked at the end of a show, do you think this could ever happen again? And I absolutely believe under the right conditions that it could. I mean, look at what COVID just did to all of us.
Right.
We were locked down. Our lives came to a standstill. That small a thing, and it wasn't small, but the fact that it took away our freedom and threw us, and a lot of people lost their businesses, and you could feel the pent-up frustration of what was supposed to only be a couple of weeks stretched out to 2 years.
Right.
And that's just a small inkling of what could happen if that had escalated and pent up frustrations. And so, yes, I think it could happen again.
Well, we've heard about, through history books and documentaries and so many different outlets and books about Salem. And this stretched further out just of Salem. It wasn't just Salem. In fact, before the show, we were talking about Andover, and I'm sure there's other towns. Why was it? I mean, if you go back to 1692 and you check the population of America was not huge. So, but what started the rumors? What started the conflict between some people would call them prophets or witches or fortune tellers. But what really started this, trials? What was the main?
Well, again, it was a perfect storm. I think if you had removed one element of what was going on, it might not have occurred.
Mm-hmm.
But you have to remember that this colony had just come over from England, where
Right.
they were burning witches by the hundreds. This wasn't a superstition. These people believed in witches, and they believed in the devil. In fact, at the pulpit on Sunday, you'd hear more about the devil than you'd hear about God. And these people went in constant fear of that. And so you have that. But then you had the Indian raids, which I think a lot of times gets missed. These were atrocious raids going on with the Native Americans. The French had enlisted the Canadians, who had enlisted Indians, and they were raiding the villages all along the eastern seaboard, and I mean butchering people. And some of the girls that ended up crying out against witches witnessed their families butchered.
Wow.
Some of them were taken into captivity. They watched one little boy hacked to pieces while they were being taken to Canada as a warning. They watched their parents be butchered, their homes burned down. And several of those girls ended up coming to Salem Village, and they were taken in by some of the locals like John Proctor, and became basically, I don't want to say slaves, but they were giving the odious chores that they helped out the lady of the house, but they were given a lot of work to do.
Mm-hmm.
And so you have the fear, and the Indian raids were still going on during this Salem witch trial thing. So you have the fear of that. Are they out in the woods? Are they right there? Then you have winter coming in, which you just feel this oppressiveness that now these girls, who most of them are teenagers, feeling that hormones and the things that teenagers go through, their day consisted of chores and reading the Bible. That was it. Then when winter closes in, it's really bad.
Right.
Then you have the whole area was without a charter. They had no governing law. And they had sailed off to England to go get it. They were there a long time. It takes a long time just to sail back and forth. So when the trial started, there was no guideline of what anyone was supposed to do with this. Harvard in Boston at that time was not turning out lawyers. They were turning out doctors and clergymen. So these judges that sat over these trials, they just plucked them out of the air. A lot of them came over from Boston and differing towns to help out, but nobody had a law degree. They basically went by the Bible that said, "Thou shalt not suffer a witch." And that's about what they went with. And so you have all of this stuff. Then Salem Village was different from Salem Town. They were a good hour apart, like walking or by horseback. And there was a feud going on there. Salem Town were the wealthy merchants living on the water, where all the exporting and importing was going on. Salem Village were farms. They were poor, they worked hard, and yet Salem Town was taxing them for the roads that they didn't even use. And they couldn't get their own church. They made them go all that way every Sunday to Salem Town to attend church. So you had this inner war going on. And then I think what the big one was there were all of these inner fightings going on with neighbors, whether it was over territory. Somebody might say, "You got that land's mine." It could be bickering. In fact, two clergymen that came to run the new church they finally got left. They said, "I have never seen such a congregation of people that are so bitter and hateful." And so you had all of these things that came together to what I'm calling the perfect storm of events that led to what happened.
What's funny is, first of all, coming over from England, even though we weren't America yet, but still you would think there was still some freedom being away from England to where they would be in a better mood. But maybe, we didn't. They didn't have the conditions we have now. They didn't have the electricity. They didn't have the phones and the cell phones and the grocery stores and all this stuff. But also land, you would think, would be more plentiful at the time. So conflict over land, be like, okay, you want that one? I'll take the one, a couple miles down the road because nobody's claimed that yet. So it kind of baffles me that they would fight over land. But maybe it was a nice river that could irrigate their crops or something. There's
well done. The anything that fronted water was coveted.
I bet.
Not only for that, but for travel. They
Yeah.
could put their little boat, little canoe in there and get around faster. But it depended on the land. There was a lot of worthless swamp around there too. So, and a lot of really harsh land that was mostly rock. So it kind of depended on the land, and obviously the better land is going to yield a better crop. So there was inbred fighting in families. I mean, it was a mess. So when we get to this, you're going to understand a lot better why this exploded as fast as it did.
Now, was it Reverend Paris, the one that was the first accuser of a witch, or who was the first accuser? And who was
he was kind of a catalyst, though. Oh. He was the Reverend and preached hell and damnation from the pulpit. On Sundays, you were there 4 hours in the morning, got to go eat, and come back for another 4 hours. It was a long day, and in the winter without heat, it was freezing in there. So at his home, he had a young daughter named Betty Paris, who was 9 years old. She was very high strung, one of those children that's nervous and just easily freaked out over things. Her cousin Abigail, who was older, she was between 11 and 12 years old, was staying with them. And Abigail was more of what we'd call today streetwise. She was a tough little booger and would kind of play tricks on Betty. And so anyway, when Paris and his wife Elizabeth was sick all the time. She was practically bedridden all the time. They had brought with them from Bermuda a slave called Tituba. And she had the sing-songy accent voice that, to the girls, she was just very exotic and interesting. And they would go to her when Daddy wasn't around, because if the Reverend had found out what they were doing, it would be really bad.
Right.
They said, teach us some magic or show us something. So one day, a bunch of their friends had gathered around, and Tituba did what they called the Venus glass. And what that was you broke an egg white into a glass of water, gently stirred it, and it was supposed to form in the egg white an image of what your future husband's career would be, because the only way out for these girls was to marry well. And so if it formed an apron, you were going to be married to a butcher, which was a good thing. If it was a scythe, you were going to be married to a farmer, etc. Well, when they stirred it, the shape took the form of a coffin.
Oh, wow.
And little Betty freaked out because she knew they weren't supposed to be doing it. Those kids were told all the time, the devil is coming for you. If you talk back to your parents, you were called Satan's child. So she freaked out. And when Reverend Paris came home, the girls had gone home, and it's just she and Abigail. Betty is just crawling under furniture and rocking and banging her head on the wall and acting really strange. And he's going, what is wrong with you? And finally, when they put her to bed, she finally went into this trance where she just stared for like 3 days. And so they called in doctors, and Dr. Gregson, he went, this is of the devil. I don't see anything wrong with her. And as soon as he said that, it got really interesting. And Abigail is noticing Betty's getting out of work. All of a sudden, the adults are paying attention to this little girl, and nobody ever paid attention to the.
So she liked it.
Oh, yeah. So Abigail's going, and suddenly the adults are paying attention. So she starts barking like a dog, flapping around the room, going whoosh, whoosh, like she's a bird, throwing the lit kindling out of the fireplace all over the room, threatens to run into the fireplace. They grab her just before she does. And so the next one up to bat is their nearest neighbor, who was Mary Walcott. And she came over, starts noticing the attention. Suddenly the village adults are coming around to witness this. It's like, my word, what is this? So Mary Walcott starts exhibiting symptoms. And you can see where this is going. Little by little, these girls, and most of them were teenagers, got in on the act. And when the older girls joined in, because at first Abigail and Betty, because they were so young, they weren't given a lot of credibility at the time. But as soon as the 17-year-olds and Ann Putnam Jr., who was 12, started exhibiting symptoms, it went from what afflicts thee to who afflicts thee. And that was the turning point. That one change of words. And Betty yelled out, Tituba, and threw her arms out, because Tituba to her was as close to a mother as she had. She spent so much time with her. And they went, Tituba? Tituba's a witch? And that isn't what Betty meant, but that's what they heard. And so Tituba was the first one pulled in. And then they came back for more. And they said, who else? Who else do you see? And one of the parents, and this is where it gets really insidious, the adults saw a way to get rid of the undesirables.
I was going to say,
the village. And they said, say Sarah good. And Sarah was a beggar who was the bane of the village. She was dirty. She went around begging all the time for food with her little daughter Dorcas, who was filthy. She would sleep in pig pens. And so they named her. And then the next one was Sarah Osborne, who had a reputation because she had married a working hand that wasn't done back then, that was much younger. And that's how it started. And these parents saw these girls as a vehicle to get rid of people that, whatever reason they had, whether it was a territorial claim, whether they just had a fight with them, that's how it started, Tony. And it's murder. It really is. For sure. Because in the end, several girls confessed that they made it up.
Okay, we'll jump forward, then we'll go back because there's some other questions. So when they finally admitted that they made it up, I mean, we weren't there. This is all going to be hearsay, but or for 400 years later, or 500 maybe. But what happened to those girls, or what did the township do once they found out that these girls lied, and it really snowballed into this, huge murder scene?
It took a long time for it to come out. In fact, by the time it did, it had almost wrapped up. It took Tituba was in prison for a year. She was in there longer than anybody else. But by then the hangings were over, and it escalated until the girls actually started crying out against Reverend Hale's wife and Governor Phipp's wife. And this was way down the line. By then, 150 people had been accused of witchcraft from all, like you and I talked about, Andover, Topsfield. They put these girls in a cart and rode them through neighboring towns like they were rock stars and asked them to point out witches.
So this was what those kids that envision Mary, Mother Mary.
Yes.
And so they almost like they were prophets themselves.
Yes.
Wow.
And this is the most attention these kids had ever gotten, and it went to their head. What got to me was that, and I'll get back to answer your question, was you'd think when they saw Bridget Bishop hanged, who was the first one, that would have been a wake-up call.
Right.
this isn't a game. Somebody, and they were just watched it in fascination. Back then, you brought your kids to hangings. It was supposed to be a lesson to them for what could happen to you if you disobey. And they still didn't stop. So little by little, as they kept crying out against people, and some people that were church-going people, like Rebecca Nurse and her sisters, Mary Esty and Sarah Cloyce, people are in shock. Rebecca Nurse, she's 71 years old. Her name was just revered in the church, and if you're a church member, it's a big deal.
Right.
There was very much a division in church. These were the members, and these are the ones who were not. And suddenly these church women were being accused, and they would be put up in front of the assembly room, which changed from time to time. It started out in Ingersoll's Tavern, and the crowd grew so big, they took it down the street to the church house. And finally, for the real trials, they had to take them into Salem town. But when the girls would be seated on the front bench, and the minute the accused witch was brought in, they started writhing and shrieking, "She's pinching me." And they were concealing pins in their clothing and sticking them into themselves and going, "Look." And they'd point at the beams and say, "She's on the beam." And people all of them were believing it. All these grown people were looking around, and they believed everything these girls were saying. And that to me it's just unbelievable. So by the time it was over, 19 people had been hung. Giles Corey had been pressed to death with stones. 5 people had died in prison, including Sarah Good gave birth to a baby, and it died due to the conditions, the cold and everything else. They brought little Dorcas to her finally in Boston prison, who was 4. And Dorcas, after witnessing her mother hanged and the conditions of being in prison, was never right in the head afterwards. She was just mentally unbalanced after everything that had happened.
Wow.
So they finally, toward the end of October, and these started in January, in the winter, went all through that summer. And the original court was called Oyer and Terminer. They began their trials in June of 1692, and they broke up, dismissed in October, after they cried out on Governor Phipps's wife. And it was like, okay, enough is enough. We're done here. The charter didn't get back in time. By then, all the hangings had taken place when the law finally did come. And little by little, these girls were losing their credibility. So this is where your answer comes in. Like Sarah Churchill was actually related to Ingersoll, who owned Ingersoll's Tavern, which is where everyone in Salem Village would gather to eat, drink, and gossip. So it was a perfect place to come in and pull your antics. And she would come in again, writhing and screaming and pointing to the rafter, and people were starting to get tired of it.
You're like, okay,
we've
seen that one before.
Yeah. The uncle who owned it took her to task. He went, "Enough." And this is what she said. She said, "We just wanted to do it for sport. We have to have sport," which was, we need a little fun. And then after that, after it was all said and done, and they started releasing the rest of them from prison, 3 of the girls confessed that they had made up the seizures. And then much later, Ann Putnam Jr., who was the one that was the most responsible for crying out against people, she, including Rebecca Nurse and her sister Mary Esty, who were hanged, she stood up publicly in front of the church much later when she was 26 and had to apologize to Rebecca Nurse's and Mary's family and admit to them they made the whole thing up. Their mother, sister, aunt, they're gone. They were hanged for something they didn't do. And she said, "I hope I lie in the dust for what I've done." And she actually had to have the Reverend read it. She couldn't read it. She was so nervous. But
wow. Well, let me ask you this. This is
Nothing
actually
really happened to them. They wandered off, and awful things happened to them later. Several became
really?
prostitutes. Yeah.
Wow.
A couple
Karma.
of them got married and had happy lives, but a lot of them were kind of messed up.
Well, we talk a lot about, and this was one of the questions that somebody wants to know is we've talked a lot about a lot of the witches were women, but there were a few men, and why were the men accused? It seems like back then seemed like the witches were always. The women were always the ones that were accused. So when and how and why did the men start getting involved as being accused of, well, I guess it'd be a warlock or a whatever. I don't know what they called them back then, or maybe it was just a witch.
Well, a lot. We're back again to these were people, the warlocks we're talking about, not the accusers, but the accused had done something that people didn't like.
Right.
George Burroughs was one of those original preachers that came in, reverends that came in and left. And he was one of them. They pulled back into town and called him a warlock.
Oh.
So again, and John Indian, who was one of the accusers, was actually Tituba's partner. And he got in on it, I think, a little bit out of fear that he was going to be next. And he thought, if I become one of the accusers and help these guys out, they're not going to come after me next. Because I don't know if they were a common law marriage or what, but he was Tituba's partner. So he was one of the accusers. There weren't very many men. I'm looking at them now. We had Timothy Swan, John Indian, Richard Carrier, and John DeRich, and that was it out of 26 accusers.
Wow.
So it is interesting when you look back at the history and why these people were selected. You get it.
Yeah.
And they were like I said, it was so insidious that these were people that the adults wanted out of the way, and they used these children as their mouthpiece to get rid of them.
Well, before we went on air, I was telling you that I'm a big history buff
Yes.
for my family tree. I've been, I'll be 54 this year, so I've started in the 80s, so about almost 40 years, 35 years that I've been studying my family history. I don't know, as a kid, I find it fascinating. And recently, I was doing some research that one of my ancestors was Thomas Chandler. He was probably like my sixth or seventh great grandfather. But he was in Andover, and apparently he and three other members of the family accused fortune teller Samuel Wardwell of being a warlock or a witch, and he was hanged because of that testimony. And it is kind of fascinating that you could say, this guy just kind of ticked me off. Nowadays we have these road rage.
Right.
So now it's almost like having a road rage of back in the 1600s of just saying somebody just happened to either make you mad or just rubbed you the wrong way, or you don't like their lifestyle or whatever. So it is kind of interesting and fascinating that, like you said, my lineage goes back to what we're talking about today. But have you ever done research on your own family and see if you connected with any ancestors in that area?
Yeah, my maiden name is Wells.
Oh.
And one of the I think he was a corporal or a captain that came over from England and settled with the original colony is related to me. one of the ones I love is I'm related to Mary Queen of Scots.
Ooh,
and she
wow.
was 6 feet tall, which was unheard of back then.
Yes.
And I'm 6 feet tall. So I'm going, yes, ma'am.
That's where I got it.
That's where I got it.
That's great. I'm surprised you're not wearing a crown. I'm just kidding.
Oh, it's being cleaned.
Oh, okay. Okay. Well, this is part of our history. And like you said, it can happen again. It just maybe in a different way, but it can happen again. But one of the things that I find fascinating when you said when they were on trial, were some of these accused just instantly, or did they do tests? It's I can't. There's like a movie. It's like if they die, they're not a witch. If they don't die, they are a witch, or maybe vice versa. I can't remember. But did they do tests? Because if they didn't really have a law, what was the trials itself?
Well, these were horrible. Basically, when they first brought them in to be questioned, this was before the actual trial, but the initial questioning, they were assumed guilty. First thing out of their mouth is, why are you afflicting these girls? When did you sign the devil's book?
Right.
One of the tests was called swimming the witch. And they would either set you in tie you to a chair, and the chair was attached to a long pole, and they would dip you into the pond until you're completely underwater. And if you didn't drown, then you were a witch, because water was supposed to repel evil. Water's the purest form we have on this earth. So if you were thrown in and you drowned, then you were innocent, which you're dead. So if you floated to the surface, you were a witch because the water had repelled you. But so a lot of people drowned before they got them out of there. And then the one that I thought was the worst was the witch's teat or tit. Supposedly witches suckled familiars, like animals, birds, snakes. Every witch was supposed to have this spirit animal. And so these poor people, and I'm talking men and women both, when they were first brought in Ingersoll's Tavern, they were taken into another room. The women would strip the women that were accused of their clothes and look them over completely for that little nipple. And I mean, completely. It was so degrading. They did the same thing to the men. And I thought, you've got to be kidding me. And I think all of us are aware of markings we have on our body that are totally normal, whether it's a skin tag or a mole. But if they saw anything, they go, yep, there's one. And so, yeah, there was that as well. They would come in and say, we found this on her. And it was it was so degrading. The other one they did was they would ask you to recite the Lord's Prayer, because a witch wasn't supposed to be able to do that, to get through it without messing up. And a few of them would miss even one word, and they would say that they were a witch. So you had to stand in front of the entire meeting house and recite the Lord's Prayer when you're already a nervous wreck that you're going to do something wrong, and the girls are screaming and writhing on the floor. And if you got one word of it wrong, it went against you.
Robert, who I work with, he does a show. It's called Minutemen Report, and he was fascinated about because a lot of times when people live on ley lines, or there's a certain type of portal, so a lot of weird things happen. Do you know if there was ever a study to see if Salem is on a ley line, or if they do consider there's a portal there, because of all places, that you're, a new country, or not even a new country, a new land, where they're trying to build a society over here. You have the natives attacking, but yet they attack their own people and commit mass murder. So what is your thoughts on a possible ley line or some type of portal that has some kind of weird energy about Salem? I'm sure there's a heaviness in Salem even to this day. I don't know. I've never been, so.
I actually have a section of it in the book,
Oh.
so that's a great question. Salem town, which is what we think of as Salem today,
Right.
where all the Halloween happenings go on, sits on Ley Lines, and they run down Essex Street.
Wow.
And there's a lot of haunted stuff going on Essex Street, whether it's Turner's Seafood or several places along there. But yeah, and for those listeners, ley lines are the Earth's energy that just happens to run in this line. In fact, they have been found underneath the pyramids and Stonehenge. They crisscross the globe, and wherever they are, they emit a lot of energy. If water's added to it, it amps it up proportionally. So they actually found that several of the judges' homes from the witch trials were sitting on ley lines, which is really, really interesting.
That is interesting. Wow. So, so what would you, when you find that out, and I'm going to show a quick picture of a ley line, and it goes through actually almost in New York and up by Boston. Yeah. And oh my gosh. So what would a ley line in your theory that could cause this type of almost like a hysteria of or a delusion of reality?
I don't really think it had anything to do with them. And they, again, were in Salem town, these ley lines that we found.
True.
Salem Village, which was farther away, where all of this broke out. I didn't hear about ley lines there. People have asked if it was ergot, the wheat fungus, that it could cause mass hysteria. Well, if that's true, there'd be a whole lot more people than just these girls.
True. Yeah.
I just think it was something that built and grew, and people believed in witches and the devil. The girls said they saw the witches flying on poles. And interestingly enough, they never use the word broom. It's always a pole. A couple of the girls said they were taken on the pole with the witches and flown over the town. So it was just this hysteria that built and built and built to a fever pitch. And again, you're looking at a very oppressed Puritan religion where I think people were not only bored out of their minds with the routine, and it's winter where your outdoor activities have been taken away. Now the men are kind of stuck in the house. I think it was one of those things that was exciting in a way. And during these trials, the crops were left behind. Everybody was cramming these meeting houses. It was like something exciting was finally happening. And it just grew from there.
So after the witch trials ended, I find it fascinating that, there's a lot of things that happened in this country, but we don't really know much about it. But Halloween and our fascination has kept this alive for all these, years, hundreds of years. Why do you think we are so fascinated with this particular subject?
I think we're fascinated with all of them. I don't know. I have an affinity for werewolves, which could explain a few of the dates I had in college. But
right.
I think it's because it is exciting. It's the unknown. It's so different from our everyday lives. There's a titillation about it, an adrenaline rush. And I mean, we're now finding out UFOs are definitely here. I mean, the mask is gone. Yep. The statements are coming out. And it's almost like people are going, okay, because I think we've known for a long time they were covering them up. But now we realize they really are here.
Yeah.
We have not seen Bigfoot very much. We have not seen werewolves, vampires, ghosts, and witches flying around, but we still want to.
Yeah.
And I think that's so interesting. With my paranormal books, I have a lot of paranormal activity happen to me when write about these haunted places, but I've never seen an apparition. I would love to see a full body apparition, and that hasn't happened for me yet. Why do you think we're fascinated with it?
I agree with you. I think, I mean, even though to this day we have so much distractions, with social media and phones and trying to pay our bills, we don't really, we're trying to find an outlet for something that's, bigger and mysterious than what our lives are at. But if you go back, when lives were a little more simple, but doesn't mean they were just because the simple life of a country, being in the country or 1930s or 1800s doesn't mean it wasn't difficult. So I guess there's things that's something bigger than what we are and where we live. And, it's like God. It's, if you believe in the universe or you believe in Jesus or you believe in what religion, or I think it's that wanting to believe there's something bigger than what your life is.
Absolutely. Whether it's video game escapism or,
right.
In Halloween, you get a free ticket to just be anything you want, to
yes.
have a blast, to be a little kid again.
Yeah.
And it is awesome. It's a lot of fun. And, we're just, in my opinion, we're just adults. We just got taller and had more responsibilities. Yeah. Everybody still has that little kid in them and that fascination. Christmas and Halloween, like I said, is a free ticket to just let it all out.
My dad, who, he's getting up there, he's almost 90 now, but he was always my aunt, or my grandma used to say there's people that are childish and childlike. My dad was childlike, and in a lot of ways I am too. I find little things funny, and I can make myself laugh, and I love to, like I said, a family tree, all these little things that just entertain me that, most people would find boring. But, yeah, I know. 'Cause, you ask somebody, it's like, who was your great grandparents? And they're like, I don't know. And I'm like, well, I can tell you my 14th great grand.
That's wonderful.
Yeah, I think that
gives you a foundation of where you came from.
Of course. In fact, my 7th great grandfather on my mother's side, their last name was Stockton, which if anybody in the New Jersey and even Washington, D.C., my 7th great grandfather was Richard Stockton, who was one of the signers of the Declaration of Independence.
Oh, wow.
So in Morven House, which is in New Jersey, I think it's Princeton. Princeton, the university was built on the land that my great-grandfather owned. So, I mean, I think it gives, I think a lot of times brings you pride. It brings you motivation of living up to a name, even though it's, 300, 400, 500 years later. And even if you have somebody that, like you said, Thomas Chandler, who accused somebody, it brings an interest and something exciting to your name. And so, yeah, it's kind of like what we're talking about. It's why we're interested in history and sometimes controversial history. It brings some excitement to our lives. It
is where we are now.
Yeah.
You can't be where we are now without what happened previously.
Right.
I love the History Channel is like on speed dial for me.
Me too.
I love that connection, and it gives your life substance and purpose to an extent.
Yeah.
And it is exciting to find out that maybe your great grandmother was an artist and you realize you're an artist. Well, did I get it from there?
Mm-hmm.
Because you have this innate ability that you just seem to be really good at it at a young age. Where'd that come from?
Right.
It's fascinating. I have 9 grandkids and I'm the fun grandma.
Wow. 9 grandkids. Well, I mean,
Yeah,
look at
and
you.
when the one came over when she was little and said, "Let's go in the closet with the flashlight and play ghosts."
Oh, right
So
up
yeah,
Grandma's
later
alley.
my son's going, "Mom, you've ruined him."
Well, I always find it fascinating because, like you said, you love wearing crowns and you're 6 feet tall and related to Mary, Queen of Scots.
Ta-da.
But
No, but my brother was in the Secret Service for 5 of the presidents of the United States, and he was stationed in Colorado Springs when I was visiting him.
oh
And he got
wow,
up in the middle of the night. It was like 2 a.m, and I heard him. And I stuck my head out and I said, "Mike, what are you doing?" And he goes, "Go back to bed." And he looked really nervous, and I'd never seen him like that. He was gone for a few hours, came back. I heard him in the living room, and he's pouring himself a drink and his hands shaking. I was 21 at the time, and I said, "Michael, what happened?" And he'd been called out on a cattle mutilation in
oh,
Colorado Springs. And he goes, "Beck, I'm trying to keep you innocent. If you knew half of what went on around here." I said, "I don't want to be innocent. What happened?" And he was saying this cow was laying in the middle of a field and that it had rained, surrounded by mud. There's no track. There's nothing. It's like something just picked it up and laid it there. And it was all like we've heard before, laser incisions and
blood
parts
drained, no
removed in its eyes. And it really freaked him out. He goes, "There's no way that there weren't tracks or something, because it was mud from yesterday. You would have seen tire tracks. You would have seen hoof prints. There
wow.
was nothing." And that really stuck with me because I'd never seen my big brother that rattled. So
That's amazing.
I believe
I'm one of those fascinated people. I don't get to go out into the haunted houses and all these different places, but I've always been I'm a Sagittarius, so a seeker of truth, and so I'm a person that loves to go seek. I'm like a cat. I'm too curious.
I've been told I have an insatiable curiosity.
Yeah,
Sagittariuses are also the champions of the underdog.
yeah,
You
that is
always
true.
need a cause, and I
Yeah,
love that about you
yeah.
guys.
In fact, I just started I haven't even announced it yet, but I started a nonprofit that we're going to be announcing soon, and it's bringing cultures together and bringing not just cultures from modern times, but also cultures from ancient times. So I'm excited.
Was that your idea?
Mhm. Yeah,
Nice.
yeah. I can't
That
wait.
is really cool.
I can't wait to announce the name and all that stuff, but I'm just waiting on a couple things. But I'm excited about it. I'm excited about it. So
Good for you. Isn't it neat to do something important that matters?
oh, for sure, yeah. And I think it can make a big difference. And and you're making a big difference because you've written so many books and you're bringing history and you're keeping history alive and the history and hauntings of Salem, the witch trials and beyond. Do you have any new books coming out or another subject you're thinking
Oh,
about?
gosh.
You're like
Okay,
you're getting a
I
hand
went
cramp.
into true crime. I ventured into true crime and did Countdown to Murder Pam Hupp, who was
Oh yeah,
the
yeah,
serial killer in St. Louis.
yeah.
I just wrapped up Countdown to Murder Alex Murdaugh, that huge case out of South Carolina that just keeps going. And that
That's
book is
crazy.
703 pages.
Woo.
And when the trial went twice as long as it was supposed to, and I had a
Wow.
deadline, I was panicking.
I bet.
So that book is now out, but it just keeps going. There may be another trial. There's still
Yeah.
2 more unsolved deaths revolving around this family. There's been
Oh
exhumations.
my gosh! Wow.
It just keeps growing.
That's just crazy. Yeah, it's that's what I find fascinating with people like you that really can get involved because some people can't handle the emotion, and some of the testimonies and just even from past history, being able to emotionally attach. And how do you, real quick before we go, how do you keep your emotions out of it? I mean, you have to write in the book, but how do you keep your emotions out of it to where you don't get overwhelmed with the grief?
It's more anger that some of these have been. The one young man found in the road was 2015. Look how long that's been.
Yeah, wow.
And they are still trying to find it. The grand jury happened recently. We're really hoping they're finally going to get through this cover up and give his family
Wow.
some information. But most of my emotion comes from interviewing the victims' families.
Yeah, that would be
it is
tough.
very hard for me. I'm very sentimental.
Yeah.
And when I interviewed this young man's mother, and she told me such wonderful stories about him, we were laughing one minute and crying the next, and those do get to me.
Yeah, I bet. Well, thank you for doing what you do. I can't wait to have you back again.
I would love-
Yes, you have a lot of books that we can talk about, but appreciate you on during the Halloween season, and I hope you have a great season and holiday coming up.
Well, you look up at the moon and maybe you'll see a witch, Tony.
That's right. That's right. Or a werewolf. Woo.
I'm still looking. Thank you very much for having me, and happy Halloween to you.
Happy Halloween to you too. And thank you everybody for tuning in. I hope you go and support Rebecca Pittman at RebeccaPittmanBooks.com. And appreciate you coming and supporting me every Friday. And Robert Hensley on Monday with Minuteman Report. Bonnie Burkert on Wednesdays for Truth Be Told Transformation. And we are part of the Paranormal Club, and we hope you'll join our club and be a part of the experiences and the history of many of these topics that we talk about. So from UFOs, ghosts, Bigfoot, and the list goes on and on. But until next time, I'm Tony Sweet with Truth Be Told. Have a great week, and we'll talk to you soon. Bye. This has been another episode of Truth Be Told. Thank you so much for watching. Recorded live at UBN Go Studios in Burbank, California. Join us on social media. Facebook, Truth Be Told Radio. Instagram, Truth Be Told Paranormal. Go to Truth Be Told Worldwide for more information on upcoming shows.